Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ruth Mitchell, and I'm the editor of the Wholesaler magazine. Welcome to today's presentation on what's your strategy for speed of flow, cost center, or profit center. Today, our presenters will be Howard Coleman of MCA Associates and Robbie LaRocca with DDI Systems, who will be presenting and answering any questions that you submit. Now, a couple of housekeeping items here for you to keep in mind. Today's webinar is planned for 75 minutes, which will include a question and answer. If you have not already done so, please put yourself on mute on the phone, and feel free to enter any questions into the Q&A box. Those will be answered during the final 10 to 15 minutes of the presentation. If there's a couple questions that we can't get to in regards to timing, note that all questions will be answered and emailed out to everyone on the line. With that, I'd like to start by introducing our guest speakers today. We'll start with Howard Coleman. Howard is principal of MCA Associates, a management consulting firm, since 1986. Howard and his team work with wholesale distribution and manufacturing companies that specifically seek out, engage with, and are committed to operational excellence. Howard and his staff of senior consultants provide operational excellence through leadership and implementing continuous improvement solutions focused on business process reengineering, warehouse and DC design, and productivity improvement, inventory and supply chain management, sales development and revenue generation, information systems and technology, and organizational assessments and development. The other presenter we have today is Robert LaRocca, and Robert works as a senior solutions expert and implementation specialist at DDI Systems, a leading provider of ERP software for wholesale distributors. In his 6 years with DDI, Robert has led an array of projects that drive distributors to achieve operational efficiencies with a focus on successful transitions and implementation. His unique expertise in warehouse management and logistics has helped dozens of distributors identify and correct operational workflows to capitalize on efficiencies. With that, I'm going to start the presentation by turning it over to you. Howard?
Thanks a lot, Ruth, for that kind introduction, and thank to all of you who have taken time out to join us today. Our effort today is going to be to demonstrate the operational and bottom line impacts that we can obtain if we do the right things and we do things right. That there is significant and continuous improvement is very much doable in our DC and warehouse environments and should be financially measurable. Financially measurable, in fact, means that it should become a very clear distinction in terms of how we approach our distribution operations. That unless you bring your distribution operations into the financial arena, there's probably little impetus for change. So, and however you do it, you have to do the right things and do things right. So having submitted my presentation to the folks at DDI and the folks at the wholesaler some time ago, I went back to my normal lifestyle, if you will, of working with clients. And along the way, I ran into some specific instances which kind of caused me to modify some of my thoughts that I want to express today, to modify the emphasis and perspective that suggests that even with many of the improvements that we've made in our distribution operations over the years, that maybe we have still missed the mark on some very critical success factors. And that factor is the element of time. In having done this, it provides me an opportunity today to suggest some what I would call additional descriptors about what we plan on talking about today. And that is that time is irretrievable, that time is an enemy, and it's the real culprit behind impeding performance metrics improvement. Now, to me, as I say that, it seems pretty simple. It makes, to me anyway, perfect sense, and I hope it will with you as we proceed today. That the antidote to time is really about driving out wasteful activities in our operations and increasing the speed of flow, the velocity of product that moves through our warehouses. Because so much time is taken up in a lot of non-value-added activities as a percentage of the total activity processing or order fulfillment time. And because it's really about speed of flow, our agenda is going to be focused on some topics, to be honest with you, where some distribution organizations, frankly, just don't get it yet. So we're going to be focused on explaining to you some of the key forces that continue to drive change, why it's important to enhance your understanding of what wastes are evident in your processes. We're going to offer you 4 planning components to achieve continuous improvement in your operations. I'm going to suggest what you should be thinking about, or maybe rethinking about when it comes to the element of waste. I will suggest some good places to start that increase speed of flow and the opportunity to use your space better. I will suggest today something brand new for you to think about. We're going to talk towards the end of our presentation today about performance metrics and why it's important to understand what the return on investment is for the efforts that you put into your initiative. And lastly, I'm going to explain to you why I worry so much. Warehouse and distribution managers, I'll tell you, they tell me all the time that they're being tasked to reduce costs in their existing operations, even in anticipation of and a drive for increased sales. Most managers tell me they want new methods and technology to gain new or additional productivity opportunities that make their WMS systems even more effective than they are, even though it's a fact that many underestimate the value of looking at their current workloads, that is, the steps they may be able to take to help achieve savings now, that is, transaction cost savings now, and ultimately avoid future costs as their companies continue to grow. In other words, they're not sufficiently looking for the good places to remove bottlenecks and constraints. So ultimately the challenge, the bottom line here, is to keep costs down. That is, keep those transaction costs down. And the number one cost is usually labor. But it's not just about labor. It's about where that labor is applied, getting more out of your investment in people, facilities, and technology. So I think addressing these challenges opens the door to rethinking our processes. How do you go about differentiating the value-added services you offer? And how do you go about using data to elevate your customer's experience? Now, as this picture tries to illustrate, is that 60 to 70% of a picker or a warehouse employee's time is spent traveling around the warehouse. That is 60 to 70% of that person's labor cost is spent traveling the warehouse. And it's one thing I can tell you with absolute certainty today. It's an absolute fact. It's an indisputable fact. 60 to 70% of their time is spent walking around the warehouse. Now, the costs associated with that is surely nothing that the customer wants to pay for. So it would seem to us, it would seem to me, that eliminating that waste should therefore represent the greatest potential source of performance improvement in any distribution or warehouse environment. But it's going to require a lot more speed of flow thinking, a real speed of flow operational mentality, as you attempt to increase the velocity of product moving through your facilities. So I suspect some of you may be looking at your computer right now, listening and asking yourself, so what does this really have to do with me? Well, I suggest you look at it this way. If your company has growth aspirations, as I expect they do, you need your distribution operations to support that growth. You may be rolling out e-commerce lot of companies are at this point. At least they're trying. And I can tell you from our experience and observation so far, it causes a lot of changes. Things like orders get smaller sometimes. Customers enter smaller orders more frequently, and they're entering those orders later in the day because there's an increased focus on improving customer service levels. That is more on-demand service. A lot of companies are expanding their SKU base. More products to stock really adds storage and access complexity. And of course, most of us are aware now that there's a pressure on labor costs because of labor shortages, and ultimately that brings about employee retention issues. So a lot of people are beginning to ask some real important questions. And that is why isn't a warehouse and a distribution center, why doesn't it contribute to the bottom line rather than be seen as just an accounting cost center? Very important question. Now, this issue of time and this issue of speed of flow runs across all your traditional functionalities within any distribution center or warehouse, whether it's receiving, put away, picking, verifying, packing up an order, loading it on a truck, and making an ultimate delivery. People at both senior levels and those who make, or maybe more who are directly related with the daily operation, are asking, will we be able to handle a projected increase in sales? Will we be able to add throughput capacity to our facilities? Now, more and more of this revolves around that question. The big question, can warehouses and DCs contribute to profit? See, I suggest it's just a different way of thinking about it. So if these questions are really so important as I seem to be suggesting they are, then it's going to be very important for most of us to learn about and employ new best practices. Understand how to go about developing speed of flow objectives, getting a better handle on cost, and providing meaningful performance measurements that describe the ultimate return on investment we can expect for the effort we put into our initiative. But the reality is, this is a pretty old topic. It existed in warehouses literally for eons, and we need to think about it in a different light. Because I truly believe it's more than just thinking about getting stuff out the door. We need to cut the time to transport materials around the warehouse, and we need to be able to cut down the distance people travel. Because there's a value proposition here. And the value proposition is, can we go about altering the ratio of the physical pick or put away travel time to the total actual time that a warehouse employee is really on task? Now think about this. And I know some of you out there have probably had a lot of experience in warehousing and maybe have done some of the picking and the packing and the receiving and the put away that we are going to address today. And if you think about it, when you get to a storage location to either put away a product or pick a product, you're literally talking most of the time, you're talking in terms of seconds. But you spend a lot more time, often it's minutes, to get to that pick location or to get to that put away location. And that's the value proposition I'm talking about. You need to alter the ratio. Now, wouldn't it be interesting to know what that ratio is? Some of my clients do, and they use it as a way of drilling down to where the barriers and the bottlenecks are. Now, I happen to think that I'm not making an overstatement here. You see, I see it as a major gateway, kind of a portal to improve warehouse performance. And it's probably always been that way, but we still treat it with less priority than it really deserves. Now, I know in many wholesale distributorships, regardless of what the product is or what the vertical market that they happen to be in, a lot of them have gone through this period of barcoding, RF scanning, WMS implementation, and they still have not fully integrated it into the rationale of how we should operate within a speed of flow concept, how we increase the velocity of product moving through the warehouse. Because there's a reality here. And I always say the reality, of course, is what the reality is. So why do I continue to see these types of scenarios, these methods of product transport? Look at them. Each one requires someone to push them. Each one requires someone to operate them. Each transport method requires a person to walk alongside with them. Kind of like being attached at the hip, isn't it? And of course, I always wonder what supermarket they get these shopping baskets from. Now, most warehouses and distribution centers for decades have used what's commonly called a person-to-goods order fulfillment process to receive, store, and pick and pack stuff. It's been a traditional method of filling orders, kind of a mainstay process. Person-to-goods typically involves sending warehouse associates to scattered areas of the warehouse to find SKUs, essentially pushing those carts that we illustrated before, pushing those, or pulling a pallet jack like we illustrated before, or driving a forklift to a specific area. That means a lot of non-value-added walking and driving back and forth, as well as walking or driving across multiple aisles between those picks or putaways. It's wasted time to direct pickers to a variety of scattered locations. Now, once upon a time, it was acceptable for a warehouse associate to spend up to 70% of their time traveling, and maybe that even involved walking up to 8 miles per day, while as little as 30% of their time was actually spent picking. These are proven facts, and it's the primary reason so many are now challenging this particular customer order fulfillment method, that is person-to-goods, as well as its impact on workforce consistency and availability. So we're going to transition in our conversation today to something called goods to person. So stick a pin in that one as we go along. Now, I suggest you should consider 4 continuous improvement planning components to increase your speed of flow. That is, increase the velocity of product moving through the warehouse. In other words, can I get an ROI by doing the right things and doing things right? And we're going to talk about lean thinking, what we should be rethinking. We're going to introduce the concept of warehouse design that you can reasonably adopt, and some of the more meaningful performance metrics that are available to us if we would only begin to measure them. Now, if you begin by examining your distribution operations within the context of these 4 planning components, I can tell you you're going to be pretty busy. Because you're going to need to develop and understand your transaction data, the SKU data. There's going to be some analysis there required. You're going to have to gain a knowledge of best practices that are available today. You're going to want to develop the design criteria of the processes you're going to use in your warehouse, the systems you employ, the equipment, and the flow methods necessary to employ. And you're going to have to think about how do I go about re-engineering those processes and incorporating them into a warehouse design layout or concept. And let me say something further about this. You should be thinking big here. Don't think little. Expect increases in productivity and return on investment. Don't accept anything less than 15 to 30% increase in productivity. That is reduction in transaction costs. It's doable. The time for accepting just incremental improvement, that is, do a tweak here, do a tweak there, that is over. Let's talk about lean thinking. We're just going to cover it very quickly. A lot of you have heard the term lean. There's a lot to it, but we're just going to use it today to demonstrate that lean thinking sits on top of this rationale of speed of flow. It's really about changing your thinking. It's more about changing your eating habits. In other words, how do you consume the resources you have available, especially time? Because it's time that will ultimately drive your labor and overall transaction costs. Now, there is something called the 10 ways. Actually, there are a few more than that. I could probably name 12 or 13 of them. Every wholesale distributor, most any distribution operation, I will guarantee you that we could find 4 to 6 being evident in almost every operation out of the 10, 12, or 13 that are available. We don't have the time to go through each one today. I'd be happy to send someone, if you've requested, I'd be happy to send you a copy of this slide as a way of better understanding it. But I can tell you there are at least 10 ways. Most of them are evident in almost every wholesale distribution operation. The point here, what I would like your takeaway to be, I hope, is to understand that your workflow can become limited by these constraints, these 10 ways. It negatively impacts consistent results, or put another way, it negatively impacts desired outcomes that you're looking for. Now, if we chose to drill down a bit further, you would find, I would guarantee you, approximately 80% of the time, you would be able to summarize these wastes into various categories. And they usually fall into 4 categories, or one of 4 categories, having to do with space utilization, obsolete storage methods, outdated receiving and picking methods, and surely, in some cases, a lack of, an underutilization of, or incorrect use of the technology, or whatever it is technology you happen to possess. So as you identify and mitigate these barriers, they can represent your opportunities for capacity and throughput improvement now. And if you do the right things and do things right, and you have these growth aspirations, again, which I believe your companies probably do, then you have an opportunity to avoid future costs as your company continues to grow. In terms of rethinking the various processes and the barriers and constraints you have, think about conveyor systems. Kind of an interesting topic to me because I see so little of it in many of the wholesale distribution warehouses and distribution centers that we walk into. And I got to tell you, I've always considered it one of the mysteries of life for me. Why don't we use conveyors to move product rather than have people move product? Why do I still see people or operations still storing product by like product groups or like vendors versus using a different criteria like hits velocity, which means there's an underutilization in many operations of something called high velocity pick zones. I want to talk a little bit more about that today. That describes how we can impact the proximity of product and the density of product. That's the focus. Why do we still have these wide aisles, these 11, 12-foot or more aisles in our warehouses? Oh, I know why, because we have to stick a forklift in. But hasn't anyone heard of narrow aisle storage? There is equipment that can accommodate in a 5.5 to 7-foot aisle. Why wouldn't we want to have more narrow aisle storage? Literally, we can almost double the amount of space that we have, usable space we have, when we have our racking in let's say in a 7-foot or a 6 or a 7-foot space, rather than an 11 or 12-foot space. I see too few companies using batch, zone, or wave picking. Most of them still seem to be picking one more order at a time. So are you still using a discrete order picking process that is picking one order at a time? There's a host of space allocation issues that we see. In other words, there's poor cube utilization where space has not been configured properly. Examples would be every product gets allocated the same amount of space regardless of product velocity or even the product's physical characteristics. Sometimes storage space is sized for maximum inventory levels, while in reality the storage locations, on average, are only about half full. Multiple SKUs in a storage one location ID. This plays havoc with productivity, one of the worst practices that continues to this day. And lastly, but not least, underutilized technology, where we've integrated the old ways of doing things, the old processes. In other words, we've built in the same expectations rather than building in different results. So I want to talk about some of more about the rethinking that has to go on. I understand that sometimes this seems a little advanced to some, and to others, they know exactly what we're talking about most of the time. I think there's a viable expectation that if we can begin to employ characteristics such as SKU profiling and slotting, we'll talk a little bit more about that, high velocity pick modules, utilization of conveyors, allocate our space better, utilize narrow aisle storage, begin to think about at least batch, zone, or wave picking in more innovative order consolidation routines, then there's a viable expectation that in the future we can exceed the type of productivity improvements that I had mentioned earlier as being a bare minimum, that is 15 to 30%. So I think a worthwhile objective for us today is to discuss, as we will in a couple of minutes, the challenge of this traditional utilization of this traditional person-to-goods product flow that I asked you to stick a pin in versus goods-to-person flow. And we'll be transitioning into that in just a moment. And as I introduce it, we'll also introduce some smart warehouse design concepts. How we can get from what you see on the left to what you see on the right, a cleaner, defined flow, and illustrative of new concepts. But before I go any further, I almost feel compelled, absolutely compelled to talk about something that I find myself talking about often, and that is the utilization of the 80-20 rule, the utilization of what's commonly called Pareto's law. You all know what it is. It's one of the most common sense, practical approaches to warehouse storage, picking, and receiving that you could ever take. Again, often called the 80-20 rule. Now, this Mr. Pareto, who was really a mathematician, but he was also an avid gardener, and he recognized that 20% of the pea pods in his garden yielded 80% of the peas. Well, we know this now holds true across a wide range of occurrences. Just think about it. Probably 20% of your customers account for 80% of your sales. Probably 20% of your customers account for 80% of your profitability, company profitability. Probably 80% of your human resource problems you have in your company might come from approximately 20% of your workforce. And it's all very solvable in terms of identifying what products are the important products, the high velocity products, as measured by number of hits. That is, how many times does someone have to go to a storage location to find that product? How often does that product appear on a customer's order? It's a matter of just gleaning the relative probability, or popularity rather, of one product versus another. Surely using this kind of basic data would be very important to us, because it can tell us where, from an accessibility, a proximity, and ergonomics point of view, where an SKU, where a stock keeping unit might be best stored versus its counterparts. So the message here today is to use the 80-20 rule as a way of some basic slotting, some basic methodology. Also consider the product's physical characteristics. You want to adopt a golden zone that encourages the location of product for the highest of the high movers, stored usually between your knees and your shoulders. Slotting will improve the ergonomics and reduces, very importantly, the travel time that we're putting emphasis on today. And I can tell you for sure, it will do so regardless of what other level of automation is that you employ. It's that simple, and it's that powerful. And how do people use this? Well, that's the question that we mentioned earlier in terms of our 4 components of our plan, is to employ smart warehouse design concepts. And in this particular photo, you're going to see one version of a goods-to-person methodology, where product is not carried all the way through an order picking process, but in this case, we offer conveyors as a way of moving that product to its next stop, whether it's to another person or whether it's to a staging or order packing and verification area. Now, this particular picture, if you will, this particular way of doing it, will most likely benefit your organization's productivity by impacting the need to walk multiple aisles between picks or put away. Now, in this particular example of a high-velocity pick zone, product is moved down a conveyor, as I mentioned. The picker doesn't have to walk all the way with it. Again, it's a great example of goods to person. A high-velocity pick zone as a concept employs flow rack and takeaway conveyor. It may be one of the better solutions and economical solutions for high-velocity, high-hit SKUs. The one you see here was an actual implementation in a electrical supply house, where in their high-velocity pick zone, they were able to store 600 different SKUs, the highest velocity products they had, and found eventually that they could pick approximately 45% of their daily picks because they had a well-thought-out, they had a well-populated and slotted high-velocity pick zone. And ultimately, they were able to pick that 45% of daily picks with one person. In addition, order processing cutoffs were extended, and as a result of the dramatically increased productivity. So smart warehouse design concepts is where some of the real bang for the buck is. It's very common sense. It's a practical approach to warehouse storage and picking design that you could ever take just by employing the 80-20 principle, Pareto's law, and supporting it with the proper storage media and appropriate conveyance methods. In each of these examples you see here, if I'm not mistaken, there are about 3 different companies that are represented here. What happens in each of these examples, there's about 500 to 700 SKUs that are in this high-velocity pick zone. Ultimately, each of those companies found that they could staff that one pick zone by one person during normal business hours. And what happens here is that the person manning this high-velocity pick zone, picks alternatively, picking from one side of the aisle to the other as they go down the aisle. The directed pick path determines the flow and minimizes pick travel time, and they place products into cartons or plastic totes. The motorized conveyor takes over at some point and moves the product to the packing station. Now, it's a bit difficult to see from the way I've taken these pictures, but overstock of that product is stored above the primary pick location and is used to replenish the primary storage location at scheduled replenishment intervals. Narrow aisle storage, we indicated earlier, can be another great place to consider. It surely questions why we still have 11, 12-foot aisles all the time. You don't have to buy the equipment that you see pictured here that allows you the mobility through those narrow aisles. You can lease it and after 4 or 5 years, you buy out the lease for $1. You can continue to use your traditional pallet racking. All you will need to do is reposition that pallet racking. So now it becomes 5.5 to 6, 7 foot aisles. It's almost like doubling your storage space and increasing the density of your storage. And that's particularly important if a company thinks they're beginning to outgrow their facility. Other great alternatives in terms of rethinking your processes. Many companies have now begun to look at batch and zone picking and maybe even wave picking. Why? Well, just look at the products. We have a high velocity pick zone. We have an area where it's conducive to store product in a narrow aisle storage. And then we have this electrical supply outfit that has to cut wire. Plumbing and heating supply company that needs to be able to pick pipe outside of the facility. Another company, maybe in the construction fastener area, that's picking product, very, very small product out of very small bins, and then kind of everyone else. These choices really emphasize the imperative of finding the best ways to offer these products to pickers so they can begin to pick those items to fill an order and dramatically impact walk time in product handling. So when we talk about batch picking, we're really talking about picking more than one order at a time, because that was going to minimize our pick travel time. Why go buy the same items all the time when you could pick them all at one time? And there's a method of doing this that works well. Zone picking. Why can't we pick orders? Have a picker pick the orders from their assigned location, where they only pick orders in their own zone. So here they're picking in this example from three different zones: from narrow aisle storage, from the pipe area, from the high velocity pick zone, and that's going into a consolidation. And they have the means and the facility to be able to put those orders back together again in terms of each individual customer order, get it packed up, and get it staged, ready to get loaded on a truck. Zone picking deserves real consideration in any company's arsenal of warehouse methods. So I just want to explore a little bit more, as I said, we were going to stick a pin in this goods to person question. There are lots of ways to accommodate and bring about goods to person. You know, back in the old days, there was Amazon was using something called the Kiva system. It was their first shot at robots. Then came along automatic storage and retrieval system. Just another view of that automatic storage and retrieval system. And what was the benefit of this? Well, each was bringing product to a picker or a warehouse person who was standing at a stationary location. The goods were being brought to that person. Now, automatic storage retrieval is probably the ideal example of goods to person. The challenge to justification, though, is initial capital investment in being able to answer the question, does your current or projected volume justify it? So as a way of comparison, there have been other alternatives. We talked about the high velocity pick zone as being something that offers us an opportunity, gets us down the avenue of goods to person, if you will. Not 100% goods to person, but at least goes in that direction. Other companies, I suspect there are some people who are here today listening that are probably using vertical lift modules or horizontal carousel. It's meant to have people stationed at the end of this equipment while product is either brought down to that person in the case of a vertical lift module, or the horizontal carousel as it twirls around, almost like the horses at an amusement park, if you will, stop and present that product to a particular picker, who then puts it into a tote or a box or whatever. And usually there's a way for that product then to move on through some other type of conveyance. Plus, today I also want to talk about what I said was going to be brand new, and that was the advent of robotics and how that may enter into the fray here of how we go about bringing about goods to person. So my emphasis, as I think it's probably been obvious to you today, has been discourage the old formula of walking to storage areas and walking material around the warehouse from one storage location to another or staging location to another, because it needs to be addressed. So I'm going to ask you to consider the next iteration, which really has to do with autonomous mobile robots. And I got to tell you, it's been quite a while since I've been quite this excited about anything, about a development in distribution warehouse in particular, especially one that makes, to me, perfect sense. So I want to introduce this to you, maybe pique your curiosity in terms of how this development may contribute to the success of transforming your own distribution operation. It surely asks us to think differently about how you get a product from point A to point B. Now, it sounds like a pretty simple question, doesn't it? But what makes perfect sense in getting from point A to point B is a different way to control picking and put-away label while cutting the cost of travel time by human counterparts. So if you accept my premise that 60% of the time of our time is spent walking around, of a warehouse worker's time is spent walking around the warehouse, then simple mathematics tells us that 4 to 5 hours a day out of a typical 8-hour shift is spent walking and moving product around. It becomes pretty obvious how a robot could make perfect sense. In other words, let the robot do the walking. Let the robot do the traveling, not people. Does that make any sense to you? So I've been on this mission, and I'm going to try to move around at a quicker pace here, but I can see my time is flying. I can report to you after about a year and a half of being on this mission that there are applications where we can scale the implementation of robots to smaller companies than one might have originally thought. So the real good news is there is beginnings of something called robotics for the masses. No longer does this topic have to be just about the Amazons and the Walmarts of this world. Are we going to see, these kind of drones flying around our house, this type of automation? Maybe someday, but not right now. It's not immediately on the horizon. But these other ones are, because they're forms of being able to transport material, conveyances. So imagine that we have some new warehouse associates now working for us, and they work as long as you want them to every day, for as many days as you need them. They never call in sick. They never show up late. They ask for no benefits. They never complain. And they can work multiple shifts without a coffee break. So now we have something new introduced to this antidote to time mix. Another way to increase the speed of flow, the velocity at which product moves through the warehouse. And what's the basis for it all? Well, the basis is this perfectly shaped body, nothing but a platform, really a transport device, that I think will be the basis for some significant distribution warehouse transformation. And I guess no one ever thought that something that looked like a Roomba vacuum cleaner or something at least shaped like one would be making an appearance in their warehouse or distribution center someday. And there are many options and arrays out there of product. Each one of what you see here, and they can travel 3+ miles per hour, which is about the speed of a human being. They can carry anywhere from 150 to 3,000 pounds or more. So think about the possibilities. So what we're seeing here is something that's no longer, something that we used to see in the science fiction movie. Rather, right now, it's poised and, I believe, transferable to traditional wholesale distribution. In fact, it's the newest version of the potential for goods to person, and really why goods to person has come to the forefront as a product flow process. So who knows? Robotics might change your entire warehouse's lifestyle. So let's have the bots do the traveling. Let's have bots do the transporting. Let's make sure that there are less picking carts being pushed around and no more empty travel. What do I mean by empty travel? How many times do we see our employees finishing up an order and then walking it all the way to a staging area or a truck loading area, and then walking that cart or driving that forklift back to somewhere in the warehouse to start the new order? There's no more empty travel with a robot. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about performance metrics. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say to you that, I think probably most of you out there know your own blood pressure and your cholesterol levels, right? Well, why not know your distribution operations, how they're faring? What's its health readings? Now, performance metrics, in addition to being a report card, ultimately help us identify where constraints may exist so we can drill down to the root causes. Ultimately, operational metrics provide the backbone for initial data analysis and subsequent and ongoing continuous improvement. And I've listed some of the more popular performance metrics. I'm not suggesting you adopt all of them. In fact, the ones that are highlighted in red are a combination of measurements that I think are most valuable and a combination of those measurements that are most often selected by many of our clients. And let me give you an example. This is an example of a wholesale distributor of construction fasteners. It took me a minute there to remember who they were. They had three different focuses in terms of their identifying their warehouse design and what new processes they were going to introduce. And one of those was that high velocity pick zone. Another was a greater utilization of narrow aisle storage. And lastly, zone picking, which was a very effective and efficient process for them to develop a new consolidation method as product was being picked from different areas of the warehouse. How do we get that all put together and into their own unique orders? And they were able to successfully utilize their software to be able to do that. Here they were measuring just some different metrics, what their labor costs, what their cost per line picked was, and their average cost per man hour. The bottom line is that after the short period of time, about 6 months after their initial implementation, they were already attaining a 20% reduction in overall transaction costs so far. And I suspect that has improved somewhat. I think they're up around 25% now after about a year. And that was, for them, a very good return on investment for their particular size of company. Finally, I want to tell you what some of the things are that I worry about, and I do worry a lot because there's resistance out there to a lot of the things that we are talking about today, and it's not so much the what you might expect, the normal resistance to change. That's still out there, but it's more like the fact that distributors are focusing on so many different things right now. There's a lot of pressure to react to the Amazons of this world and all the disruption that you hear about and so on. And they're focused on what I like to call more likable and friendly topics. Things like strategies to increase sales. Boy, you sure can't fight that one. Selling price optimization, a hard one to argue against. And more recently, everyone's jumping on the e-commerce applications bandwagon. Sure can't fight that one. So my worry is that unless, or at least an equal amount of attention is paid to the distribution side and the warehouse operation, that the improvements and gains that they might make as a result of focusing in on these likable and friendly areas will somehow get whittled away by unnecessary cost at the back end. I just think it should be something we should be aware of. So I would like you to consider this as a call to action. What do you want your new reality to be? How would you answer the question? How do you currently stack up in terms of your distribution operations cost structure? Can you leverage speed of flow? And how will you execute it when you need to get it done? I think those are some very interesting questions as it relates to your company's competitive advantage and your company's position in the marketplace. And it also serves as a recognition, I believe, that DCs and warehouses are no longer just a cost of doing business, a necessary evil, as I one time heard it expressed, but a strategic asset and a major component of your business strategy. So I'd like to thank you very much today for your time. If you'd like to email me, I'd love to send you along our distribution center and warehouse performance assessment guide. I think after you read it, you'll see that you're holding a roadmap to improvement in your distribution operations. Again, just send an inquiry to hcoleman@mcaassociates.com. So consider it your roadmap. At this point, I'd like to turn this over to the folks from DDI. I know they have some important things to say today also. Robbie?
Thank you, Howard. Hello, everybody. I'm Robbie LaRocca, like they said earlier, with DDI Systems. And I wanted to just go over with you guys some extra information about DDI Systems and our ERP solution. So we've been talking about warehousing and zone batch picking, and some softwares, our third-party softwares, they're not fully integrated throughout your company. Our ERP solution is a full one-stop shop solution that has the WMS, wireless warehouse capabilities, fully integrated throughout the software. Okay, so a little bit about the company. It's been founded back in 1993, so we've been around for a while. We have over 1,100 distribution companies running our software with over 18,000 users in total. All right, we are a good solution for the different markets that we have listed here. Right, so we don't go after every market. We know our niche market. And these are the different industries that we do work well with our software. All right. If you have any questions when you're on our software, we are a 100% based company with development and support. So if you have questions, you're calling somebody and talking to somebody like me. All right. We also have support offices from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. So we have a Connecticut office, New Jersey office, an office in Missouri, and an office in Portland, Oregon. So we're across the country. We also include up to 2 to 3 major software upgrades annually, which is included in your monthly support fees. So you do get enhancements to a software. If we add certain things, it all comes with that monthly support fee. All right. We have a couple different, we have a quote here from one of our customers. And, that initial investment, Howard talks about the initial investment with these bots and stuff like that. Within 3 years, about most of our customers have found a return on their investment with the ERP software purchase as well. Okay. Specifically talking about our WMS option or our offering, all right, some of the things that we claim that it's going to help with efficiencies. So, some of that, like Howard was saying, goods to person, person to goods procedure, we try to reduce the amount of time traveling around the warehouse. Well, how do we do that? Well, we do offer batch picking with wireless scanning guns, all right? Decreasing errors. So, scanning an item, if you have similar items, scanning an item, it's going to tell you if it's the wrong item. It will beep at you. So you're going to be able to prevent mispicks and keep your customers happy because they're getting the products that they're ordering, and you don't have to deliver and make second shipment deliveries to these customers because it's right the first time. We have improved visibility, so we do have the way of tracking, what are your scanners doing? Are they picking orders? How long are they picking orders? How many orders are your warehouse guys picking? Are there people that are doing the 80-20 rule? Are 80% of your orders picked by 20% of your staff? I certainly hope not, but you'll be able to have reporting on how your warehouse guys are picking orders. Seeing inventory accuracy. So when orders are picked, and somebody's looking, is this product available? You'll easily be able to see, is this item on the shelf or has this been loaded on a truck? You'll be able to see what location it's sitting in the warehouse. All right, and then the other thing is saving time and money. So doing daily cycle counts as opposed to full-fledged physical inventory where you shut down your warehouse for a full year, for a few days. This will allow you to hopefully eliminate that, where counting 50 items a day eliminates the need to actually shut down and count your entire inventory in one or a couple days. All right. If you do have any questions as far as or want to get more information about our DDI ERP solution, please feel free to contact us. You can call the number below. You can also go to the website listed here to get a little bit more information about DDI as an ERP solution. All right,
perfect,
Howard
Robbie,
has.
Whoops.
Oh, sorry,
Robbie, hi, this is Bruce. Thank you so much. That was a great information on DDI systems, so thank you for that. I want to take a minute or two here. There's some two Q&A questions that had just come in, so I'll just jump right into those. And Howard, these are actually both for you.
Okay.
The first question that came in said, in describing the differences between person to good and good to person, you offered several different material handling methodologies that could be used. Now, understanding that each has its own pros and cons, in your experience, which one or combination of approaches seems to work best and still have some of that bang for the buck that you described?
Boy, you started off with tough ones first, didn't you?
I sure did.
Well, it's a tough, it is a tough question to answer because I don't know what's in the questioner's mind in terms of whatever it is they're visualizing regarding their own specific situation. So it's almost like not having the advantage of seeing the site itself. But I can tell you from my experiences particularly over the last couple of years, as the attention to warehouses and distribution centers has just mushroomed, that we're finding in terms of budgetary issues and what people think they can do from a process change point of view, that the concept of this high velocity pick zone, which incorporates, as you remember in the pictures, the the flow racking and the conveyor, and using that high velocity pick zone for fast movers, where ultimately 40 to 50% of those those fast movers are being picked essentially from one zone, has turned out to be from an ease of implementation, pretty simple. From a cost point of view, one of the lesser investments that you'll probably have to make in your life. And add to that the advantages of narrow aisle storage, particularly for those companies that are having some issues with where space is becoming a premium. And there's always talk about, we have to move or we have to add on to the building, but everyone seems to forget the narrow aisle storage option. So, there's opportunity there to sometimes gain a lot of space just through utilizing narrow aisle storage. It's a good choice. So the high velocity pick zone narrow aisle storage, I think a good choice, is subject to further analysis and evaluation and seeing what the questioner really had in their mind. As I mentioned, I'm also extremely excited about what's going on in this robotics world. It's changing every day. Prices are coming down. The investment that most of them are offering their products now without any capital investment. You can lease it. There's something called Robotics as a Service now. So it's almost like renting a robot's time. So it gives you some other options for the procurement or acquisition of robotics capability. And so if you're in the transformational thinking mode at this point or phase, you might want to take a look at robotics and not let your education in that area get too far behind.
Gotcha. Thank you. I have one other question here for you, Howard, and it's very good. Are there any case studies that you could provide which would further describe what other companies in the industry have done?
Yeah, that's a little easier one, actually. We have various case study sheets, if you will, where we've tried to write up some examples of what different companies have done. So I would say if it's something you're interested in, if you would just email me an inquiry, just briefly, doesn't have to be a long dissertation, but just briefly describing your DC warehouse operations, what industry you're in, size, what you might be trying to accomplish. And what I'll do is take that and match it up against some of the case studies that we have on file, and that might be the best way to kind of match up the question to the answer. Okay?
Well, that sounds like a plan. Well, that concludes the Q&A that we have on the presentation that came in. I'll alert everyone to the slide that's on the screen there right now, which showcases the contact information for Howard Coleman, as well as Robbie LaRocca, for any further questions. As always, I can be reached here at the Wholesaler Magazine for any questions you might have. And Howard and Robbie, thank you very much for a great presentation today.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
All right, have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.